I never believed in signs until the morning I woke up to the sound of a shovel breaking ground in the empty lot between our houses. It was 6:30 on a Saturday, and I'd been awake for hours anyway, staring at my bedroom ceiling, thinking about all the ways my life had become smaller since the breakup. Marcus had taken the dog, most of our friends, and somehow even my confidence when he left. I'd spent 3 months turning myself inside out, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have been enough. The therapist I'd seen twice before giving up told me I needed to stop making myself invisible. But invisibility felt safer than being seen and found wanting. The rhythmic sound of digging pulled me to the window. The lot had been empty for as long as I'd lived here, just a rectangle of packed dirt and weeds between my rental house and the Victorian next door. Through the morning haze, I could make out a figure working methodically, turning over soil in long, deliberate rows. I made coffee and tried to ignore it, but curiosity won. By 7, I was standing at my back fence, watching a man I'd never seen before transform that dead space into something that looked almost intentional. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair pulled back in a bun, and forearms that suggested this wasn't his first time working with his hands. He wore an old green t-shirt with the sleeves cut off and jeans that had seen better days. He must have sensed me watching because he looked up, shading his eyes against the early sun. "Morning," he called out, his voice warm and slightly out of breath. "Sorry if I woke you. I'm trying to get this in before it gets too hot." "You're fine," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. "What are you planting?" He straightened up, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Everything, hopefully. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, herbs, some flowers for the bees. I just moved into the place next door and the landlord said I could use this space if I wanted." He grinned, and something about it was disarming. "I'm Caspian, by the way. I know my parents were either really into Narnia or really pretentious, maybe both." I found myself almost smiling. "Owen, and that's actually kind of a cool name." "Thanks. Most people just call me Cass." He leaned on his shovel, and I noticed the way his shirt stuck to his chest, the easy way he inhabited his body. "You garden at all?" "No, I kill succulents," he laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to fill the space between us. Succulents are temperamental. They seem easy, but they're actually kind of dramatic. Need just the right amount of neglect. He paused, studying me with eyes that were either green or hazel. I couldn't tell from this distance. "If you ever want to learn, you're welcome to help out here. Extra hands are always useful." I should have said no. I should have made some excuse about being busy or not being a morning person or any of the 1,000 reasons I'd been giving myself for not doing things lately. Instead, I heard myself say, "Maybe. I'll think about it." "Cool," Cass said, and went back to his digging. I watched for another minute, then went inside and spent the rest of the day pretending I wasn't thinking about the garden or the man creating it from nothing. But Sunday morning, when I heard the shovel again, I was already awake, and by 8 I was standing at the fence with 2 cups of coffee, telling myself I was just being neighbourly. Cass looked up and his whole face brightened. "You came bearing gifts. You're officially my favourite neighbour." "I don't know what you take in it," I admitted, holding out both cups. "Black is perfect." He took one and drank deeply, closing his eyes. "God, that's good. Thank you." When he opened his eyes again, they were definitely green. "So, you here to kill some succulents or actually interested in getting your hands dirty?" Something about the way he said it, without judgment or expectation, made it easy to climb over the fence. He handed me a pair of gloves that were too big and showed me how to tell if the soil was ready, how to create furrows at the right depth, how to space seeds so they'd have room to grow. His hands guided mine, patient and sure, and I tried not to notice how careful he was about the contact, asking permission with his body language before showing me each new thing. We worked through the morning, and Cass talked. Not in the way that demanded responses, but in a way that created space for them. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about his mum's garden that had fed half the neighbourhood, about studying environmental science, and then realising he was better with his hands than with lab equipment. He'd been working as a landscaper for the past 5 years, saving money, trying to figure out what came next. "What about you?" he asked as we planted tomato seedlings. "What's your story, Owen?" I wanted to deflect to give him the sanitised version I'd been giving everyone, but there was something about kneeling in the dirt, about the way he asked without pushing, that made me tell the truth. "I'm a graphic designer. I work from home, which is good because I've been kind of shit at leaving the house lately. I went through a breakup a few months ago and I'm still figuring out how to be a person again. Cass nodded slowly, pressing soil around a tomato plant with gentle fingers. Breakups are brutal, especially the kind that make you forget who you were before. Yeah, I said quietly. Exactly that. He didn't offer platitudes or advice. He just handed me another seedling and said, "Well, plants are pretty good at reminding you that growth happens slowly, and that sometimes you need to get your hands dirty to make something beautiful." I looked at him, this stranger who'd appeared in an empty lot, and somehow made it feel less empty, and felt something shift in my chest. Something that might have been hope or might have been terror, probably both. Over the next few weeks, the garden became a routine. I'd wake up and listen for Cass, then make coffee and head outside. Some mornings we worked in comfortable silence. Other mornings we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his ex-boyfriend who'd wanted him to be more ambitious, more focused on career and success. I told him about Marcus, about how I'd spent 2 years trying to be less sensitive, less emotional, less of whatever it was that made me too much or not enough. "That's exhausting," Cass said one morning as we weeded around the pepper plants. "Trying to be less of yourself." "It didn't even work," I admitted. He still left. Cass sat back on his heels, looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Maybe the problem wasn't you. Maybe the problem was him asking you to be less. I didn't know what to say to that, so I focused on pulling weeds, trying to ignore the way my hands were shaking slightly. The garden grew. Tiny green shoots pushed through the soil, reaching for sunlight. Cass installed a drip irrigation system and built trellises for the beans and cucumbers. I learned the names of things: brandywine tomatoes, shishito peppers, lemon cucumbers, purple basil. I learned that watering in the evening invited fungus, that marigolds deterred pests, that some plants thrived when you left them alone while others needed constant attention. I also learned things about Cass, that he hummed while he worked, old folk songs his mum had taught him, that he had a degree in environmental science but felt more alive with dirt under his fingernails than he ever had in a classroom, that he'd been single for a year and was in no hurry to change that he thought too much about climate change and not enough about what he wanted for dinner, that his favourite colour was the specific green of new leaves in spring, and I learned things about myself, that I could wake up without dread, that my hands were capable of nurturing instead of destroying, that I could talk about Marcus without feeling like I was disappearing, that being seen didn't always mean being found wanting. One evening in late June, after we'd spent the day harvesting the first round of lettuce and radishes, Cass suggested we cook dinner together. "I've got a grill," he said, "and you've got that kitchen I can see through your window that's way nicer than mine. We could combine resources." My immediate instinct was to say no, to retreat to safety, but I thought about the garden, about how nothing grew in safety. "Okay," I said. "Yeah, let's do that." We grilled vegetables from the garden and made pasta with the basil and tomatoes that were just starting to ripen. Cass moved around my kitchen like he belonged there, and I realised it was the first time since Marcus left that another person's presence felt like addition instead of subtraction. We ate on my back porch, watching the garden in the golden hour light, and Cass told me about his dream of starting a non-profit that taught gardening to kids in food deserts. "I don't know if it's realistic," he said, spinning pasta on his fork. "The money's not great and everyone keeps telling me I should be more practical." "Do you want to be more practical?" I asked. He looked at me, and something passed between us, some understanding that went deeper than words. "No, I want to do something that matters, even if it's small." "Then do it," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "The world has enough practical people." His smile was slow and devastating. "You're good at this, you know." "At what?" "Seeing people, really seeing them." He paused, holding my gaze. "It's a rare thing." My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, and I knew I was standing at the edge of something that could hurt me. But I was tired of being safe. "Cass," I started, not knowing how to finish. "Yeah?" He leaned forward slightly, and I could smell earth and basil and something underneath that was just him. "I think I'm really glad you moved in next door." "Yeah?" His voice was soft, careful. "I'm really glad too, Owen." The space between us felt charged, full of possibility. I could have leaned in. I think he would have met me halfway, but I wasn't quite ready, and somehow he knew that. He stood up, started clearing plates, and the moment passed. But it didn't disappear. It hung in the air between us, patient as seedlings waiting to break ground. July brought heat and tomatoes in abundance. We'd harvest in the early morning, our shirts already sticking to our backs, and I'd feel Cass's presence beside me like a constant hum of electricity. Sometimes our hands would brush reaching for the same tomato, and neither of us would acknowledge it, but neither of us would pull away quickly either. One morning I found him sitting in the garden at dawn, just sitting, his eyes closed and face turned toward the rising sun. I almost left him alone, but something made me climb the fence and sit beside him. We stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes, not talking, just existing in the same space. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked at me and said, "Thank you." For what? For sitting with me, for not needing me to explain. He picked up a handful of soil, let it run through his fingers. My ex used to say I was too quiet, too internal, that I needed to communicate more, be more present. "You're the most present person I know," I said, and meant it. He turned to me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath stop. "Owen," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a question and an answer at once. "Yeah? I need to tell you something, and I don't want it to make things weird between us, but I also can't keep not saying it." He took a breath. "I like you, more than as a neighbour or a friend, and if that's not something you want, that's completely okay, but I needed to be honest about it." The words should have scared me. 3 months ago they would have sent me retreating behind every wall I'd built. But I'd spent the summer learning that growth required risk, that beauty came from vulnerability. "It doesn't make things weird," I said quietly, "because I like you too. I've been trying not to because I'm still kind of a mess, but I do." "You're not a mess," Cass said firmly. "You're someone who got hurt and is learning to grow again. That's not the same thing." I laughed, shaky and relieved. "When did you get so wise?" "I spend a lot of time with plants. They teach you things." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and took my hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and fitting my fingers between his felt like the most natural thing in the world. "So what do we do now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not very good at this." "Neither am I." He smiled, and it was the most genuine thing I'd ever seen. "But maybe we can figure it out together, slowly, like growing things." So we did. We didn't rush. We kept working in the garden, kept cooking dinners together, kept existing in each other's space. But now when our hands brushed, we'd let them linger. Now when we sat on my porch in the evenings, he'd lean against me, solid and warm. Now when he looked at me, I'd let myself look back without fear. The first time he kissed me was in late August, surrounded by tomato plants heavy with fruit and the smell of basil warming in the afternoon sun. It was gentle and questioning, his hand cupping my face like I was something precious. When we pulled apart, he was smiling, and I realized I was smiling too, and it felt like the first real smile I'd worn in months. "Okay?" he asked. "More than okay," I said, and kissed him again. The garden taught us both. It taught us that growth takes time, that some things can't be rushed, that you have to tend to things carefully if you want them to thrive. It taught us that beauty can emerge from empty spaces, that what looks like nothing can become everything with patience and care. By September, the lot between our houses was lush and abundant, and so was I. Cass and I were figuring it out day by day, learning each other the way we'd learned the garden. And every morning, when I woke to the sound of him working outside my window, I felt grateful for signs, for empty lots, and for men who knew how to grow beautiful things from nothing.